good evening, and thank you for tuning in online tonight to our Wednesday night broadcast at Victory. We're so thankful for each and every one of you that tunes in for all our services, whether it be on Sundays or Wednesdays. We're just very, very thankful for that. One of the things that we strive to do here is to develop a deeper walk with the Lord as well as deeper connections with one another. And we do that through groups, small group settings that meet here on campus. And we would love for you to be a part of these groups if you aren't already. We have multiple times that they meet, Sundays and on Wednesdays. Tonight, right after we hear from some special music from our worship team, we're going to move into one of those groups and let you hear and experience the teaching. We hope and trust it's a blessing to you tonight. Thank you so much again for being here this evening.
All my troubles seem so tall. All my faith just feels so small. But I will sing through rise and fall. My hope is in the Lord. You chase away my fears with peace. You calm the storm inside of me. Amazing love, how can it be? My hope is in the Lord. Oh, my hope is in the Lord. Like a river flowing, levee breaking open, rushing wild, it's always free and strong. Let my heart remember, I am yours forever. There's no end to the song. Your love goes on and on and on and on. On and on and on and on. Never failing new each day. Always true and will not change. Forevermore my soul will say, my hope is in the Lord. Oh, my hope is in the Lord. Like a river flowing, levee breaking open, rushing wild, it's always free and strong. Let my heart remember, I am yours forever. There's no end to the song. Your love goes on and on and on and on. On and on and on and on. Over every fear, over every shame, always on my side, always makes a way, taking all my sin, rising from the grave. I will lift my voice, I will praise your name. Over every fear, over every shame, always on my side, always makes a way, taking all my sin, rising from the grave. I will lift my voice, I will praise your name. Like a river flowing, levee breaking open, rushing wild, it's always free and strong. Let my heart remember, I am yours forever. There's no end to the song. Like a river flowing, levee breaking open, rushing wild, it's always free and strong. Let my heart remember, I am yours forever. There's no end to the song. Your love goes on and on and on and on. On and on and on and on. On and on and on and on. On and on and on and on.
And so welcome everybody. We are jumping back into our study on Esther last week. we started in chapter number 4. And we didn't get very far, but we're gonna kind of pick back up right there. If you'll remember where we're at right now, Haman is the king's, one of his right-hand men. He has been brought up in prominence, and y'all remember why? Y'all remember what the reason why I told you why he was elevated to that position? Does anybody remember? Exactly. There really was no reason, because he's such conniving, whiny, just a sketch of a kind of guy. And you're like, why? What did the king see in that? You know. But nonetheless, he is elevated that way. And so we talked about in chapter number 3 his promotion. That's how we started off, and how he was brought in, and everybody reverenced him, right? And the king commanded concerning him, you're to give him reverence. But Mordecai was like, not going to happen, right? And because he was a Jew, and I think it was along those lines of this false God worship, and Mordecai knew, thou shalt know the gods before me. And so I think there was an element of that right there as the reason why he was going to do it. And so that provoked Haman, right? And he was very upset about that, and he didn't like that aspect, his wrath and desire. He wanted to not only hurt Haman, he wanted to deeply hurt him, right? And so he drew up a petition in verses 7 through 10, and he cast lots. That's what Pur is from. The casting lots. That's why it's the feast of Purim comes from that, and that's how they oftentimes did things. They would cast die, draw straws, that sort of thing, and they would make their decisions based on that. So Haman goes to the king, and he tells him, hey, there's a group of people here. They're not honoring you. They're not reverencing you. We need to do something to them. I'm going to give you X amount of dollars, in the tune of about how much? $5 billion with a B, to take care, in our day, in our society, that's what the dollar amount would have been, to take care of them. And the king's like, well, sure, that sounds good to me. Go for it. And so that's what took place then. And then the king told him in verse number 11, all right, hey, the silver is given to thee. People ought to do with them that seemeth good unto thee. So he was really good standing with the king. There was a predominance of Haman at that point. And then we talked about the pitilessness of him. Remember, the chapter ended in verse 15 of chapter 3. It says, the post went out, the decree went out that we're going to kill all the Jews in about 11 months or so, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. I mean, that was protocol, right? But the city, Shushan, was perplexed. So the city's like, what in the world is going on? Right now, the Jews that are in Shushan, the reason why they're there, we've already had the return back to Jerusalem. Many went back to Jerusalem. Temples rebuilt. Ezra, Nehemiah went back, built the walls. Ezra was contemporary of him, reading the scriptures. And Ezra was more on the spiritual rebuilding. Nehemiah was more on the political and civical side of the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And so many of the Jews had already gone back, but it was a long, long way. I think it was like 600 miles. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was a long journey from Shushan there in Persia back to Jerusalem. And so they had been there for quite a while. Once they got their freedom, history tells us that many of them stayed there. They had jobs, they had good jobs, many of them did. They had starting to make a living, and they were getting along with the Persians, and the Medes okay. And so there's still a lot of them, many of them in the city, and they're like, what's going on? Everybody's like, what's going on here? I mean, there's no animosity. Why this decree? Why is he going to kill everybody? And so then Mordecai, because he was a Jew, he was in the palace, he is going to go and plead to Esther. All right, so let's pick up in chapter number 4. And we see, that's where we started last week, talked about the pain of Mordecai. Verse number 1 says, Then when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes, put on sackcloth of ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city, and he cried with a loud and bitter cry. So very, very visibly, very, very vocally, Mordecai lets his pain be known. All right, and so we know, I talked about how that was a very great indication of intense grief and sorrow when you have the sackcloth and the ashes combined there, and because verse number chapter 3 of verse 4, he revealed that he was a Jew. Remember, and so now he knows this edict has come out. There's a death warrant on his head. There's a death warrant on his cousin, the queen's head, and so he holds nothing back from showing his pain. Neither does any other Jew in the land. His actions were mimicked throughout the land. We see that in verse number 3. In every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So that's what we see in the verse part of chapter number 4. Then we move from the pain then to the pity. In verse number 4, we see evidence that Esther and Mordecai's relationship had been made public by now. It was known in the palace, seemingly, that there was a connection right there, and word gets back to the queen that Mordecai's out there making a scene. I mean, he's out we said he's out in the street of the city. It's kind of like the town square, right? And so he's out there, he's half naked, he's laying in sackcloth. So she, verse number 4, chapter 4, she sent raiment to him and told him, hey, get that sackcloth off of him and all that sort of stuff. But he didn't take it, right? He's like, no, this is too heavy. And so she's like, what in the world's going on? Find out to what it was and why it was in verse number 5. What's going on? And so Hatach, that's her chamberlain, so to speak, he finds Mordecai out in the town square, and he's like, hey man, your cousin wants to know what's going on. What is the deal here? And so then we see the premise, or the reason, is where we finished up last week. We didn't talk about it, but the reason why Mordecai was in such grief. All right, so let's pick up in verse number 7 today. Father, bless our study of this book. Help us to see you, even though we don't see your name in this book. Lord, help us to see your presence and your intervening in that today, and help me make good application with that. Bless those who aren't able to be here today. In Christ, let me pray. Amen. So verse number 7 says, Mordecai told him, he's telling Esther's guy, Hatach, here's what's going on. Told him all that happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. And so he lays it all out there. And so it's obviously the amount of money was so significant, when we discussed that again last week, $5 billion, that Mordecai thought it important enough to make sure Esther knew about it. And another point of interest right here, the fact that he knew about the details of the money that was exchanged, the fact that he was aware of some of these details, just further evidence that he was a very high up figure in the palace, in the king's court. And it's also this point where he relays that it was Haman who actually devised the plan. Esther didn't know that at this point. Mordecai is aware Haman is the one that did it. Look at verse number 8. And he sends a copy of the decree for her as far as the proof, the first part of it. And he gave him the copy, the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther. So he says, look, take her this. She'll know now why I'm so upset. And she should be too. So the last part of verse number 8, we see Mordecai, really he's pulling out all the stops. All right? And he makes a plea to his cousin. So that's where we see the plea. If you're taking notes, that's number 4, the plea. We had the pain, the pity, the premise, and then number 4, the plea. Verse 8. So he gave the copy to the writing of the decree that was given to show to Esther, and then it says, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. And Haman came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. So, a couple things here. First of all, Mordecai is expecting, or he's asking or expecting Esther to go before the king to ask for help, ask for deliverance. And that is the premise of why he's doing what he's doing. He said, you've got to do something about this. Here's the second thing. It looks as if at this point, at least Hatach is going to be aware that Esther is indeed a Jew, right? I mean, her name had been Hadassah. It was changed right here to Esther. And so now this is about to be unveiled, that she indeed is a Jew. Verse 8, the last part of it, to make supplication unto him and to make request before him for her people. Now, if he said it like that, her people, if Hatak, if Mordecai relayed that to Hatak that way, then it's going to link Esther to the Jews at this point right here. So then notice, at least Hatak is going to be aware of it. Notice her response then, more like her justification or her reason. Notice her premise, number 5, for taking an immediate stand. This is her premise. Verse 10, again Esther spake unto Hatak, and she gave him commandment unto Mordecai. She said, all right, here's what you tell Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold up the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king in the last month, these 30 days. And so they told to Mordecai Esther's words. So there's the custom of the day. No one, not even the queen, approached the king uninvited, unannounced. Even if you were invited, you showed up and he would point out his little, he may not even say anything. He may just point the scepter towards you, and then that would be your permission to approach the throne, right? And so she's like, Mordecai, she has to know Mordecai knows this because of his position, but she's like reminding him, are you serious? You know the drill. No one can do that. He hasn't called me. I haven't seen the king in a month. Why? How can I just show up? Now, the danger which he faces going for the king uninvited is obviously, could be certain death, right? Mordecai doesn't buy it. Or at least he doesn't want to accept it. Notice number 6, if you notice, the pushing of Mordecai. Verse 13, then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews, just because you're a Jew, Esther? You think you're going to get out of the edict? This is the law of the Medes and Persians, cuz no one is exempt. What is done is done. What is law is law. He says, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, if you don't say anything, if you keep your mouth shut, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. God is going to spare his people, but it ain't going to come from you if you don't say anything. He says, God is he's going to spare a remnant, but thou, you and your father's house, Esther, including me, shall be destroyed. And he says, who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Now, this is probably the most famous line in the whole book of Esther. And who knoweth whether thou art come for such a time as this? How many church campaigns and slogans and revivals have we seen that banner, for such a time as this, right? That's where we get it from right here. Listen, do you not think that maybe you're here for a reason, that God put you to think about it? Look closer at his response, verse 14. He says, for if thou, he doesn't say, please go talk to the king. He's not begging. No, he says, look, you are not exempt from this decree. If you don't step up and take a stand right now, deliverance will come from another place and you're going to die. The last part of verse 14, he kind of softens up a bit and he encourages her. He says, look, Esther, don't you think it odd? Don't you think it a little strange? Don't you think it a little ironic? It's not a coincidence that you, a little Jew, has been put in the place of the queen. Now, there's a pretty strong argument on Mordecai's part. I mean, he does have something there, right? I mean, he's not just blowing smoke. I mean, that's kind of deal. So he appeals to her conscience. And he actually appeals to her intellect as well. She's no dummy. We're going to see she's sharp as a tack. And he knows that. He reared her, right? He's a cousin. He reared her like a father. And so he knows she's smart. And so he's appealing to that intellect because he knows she's going to process what he's saying. And if he can get to her heart and get into her mind, he knows he's got something there, possibly. And so, obviously, she thinks about it. I personally think she prayed about it. And then she delivers her response back to Mordecai. Hence, we see, number 7, the plan that she devised in verse number 15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. All right, go tell Mordecai, here's my response. Here's the plan. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan. Have a big Jewish get-together. And fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days. 3 nights, 3 days, completely fast. And she said, and then I also and my maidens will fast likewise. We'll do with the same 3 days. We're not going to eat anything either. And she says, and so I will go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, she says. And then she makes this. I love this statement of her. She says, if I perish, I perish. Exactly what she said. And if I perish, I perish. Man, it shows courage. It shows faith. It shows confidence in God. So Mordecai went his way. He did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So the feast is enacted. The gathering of the Jews is there. Probably the closest few verses indicating their dependence on God right here without actually mentioning Him. Because remember, this is the only book that doesn't mention the name of God. So the plan is for this fasting, this getting together, praying and seeking God and just begging God for deliverance. Make a real quick application. I don't want you to put too much into this first thought here, but Esther kind of gives us 2 examples right here. One, she gives the example of a compassionate Christ. Now, just as Christ was an intercessor before a king, right, so was Esther. If we look at the Jewish people, they were all destined to die, right? I mean, they were all doomed. I mean, the death sentence had been created, except for someone to step in. And so you and I, as sinners, were destined to die. We're headed that way were it not for someone to step in and intercess for us right there, Jesus Christ, who loved us, had compassion on us, and willing to lay down His life for us. And so it's not a perfect comparison right there, but we can draw from her action, you know, the heart of Christ. Second example, Esther was a compassionate Christ, but also a committed Christian. We see her attitude. We see her adoration here. We see her action. And all those are signs of committed Christians. There's the heart, right, attitude, the adoration, the love for God, and then the action put into place to demonstrate our love for Christ by sharing Him with others. So, I don't know where you're at right now in your life, but, you know, are we even willing to invite somebody to even come to church with us? Or are we too scared, thinking they're going to shut us down? I mean, here we got a young lady who's willing to risk her life. If I perish, she says. To go in and put her head on the line for her people before a king. Pretty awesome. All right, so now let's move to chapter number 5 then, all right? And we'll see how far we get on. Any questions about now or any comments on chapter 4?
Do we know if her maidens, were they Jewish girls? Or were these just
We don't think we see that. There's probably good indication because she probably, once she was installed as the queen, picked her staff, right? Got her court. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were. But either way, they were super loyal, right? There's no way they were going to spill the beans on anything, right? If they knew she was Jewish, they still wasn't going to share that. But I don't know. I don't have any indication one way or the other as to whether or not. I would have to assume that there was at least a mix there if she was choosing her own, chambermaids. Good question. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Or all right, easy.
Haman,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know why he was there or why his status was as such as what he.
Yeah. There's no indication as to why, and I was just kind of making an assumption a couple weeks ago or last week. Not really an assumption. I was just making a comment. The fact that he had such dirty, rotten, scoundrel, rat life and aspirations.
How did he have so much money though?
Well, so we talked about that last week. We feel like, the commentators feel like he was going to acquire that money from all the Jews he was going to kill. He knew, because again, the Jews had been there, they've been making business, there was a ton of them, and we're talking about a large land, and many feel like he was going to acquire that money from the families from the Jewish families that he was going to slaughter. Yeah, because it was going out. It talks about how it went from post to post and how they had a interstate system and how this worked. It was pretty well organized, and it was on the exact same date that all across the land they were all going to be put to death. And so I'm sure it was one of those, you go in, you ravage their houses, you put the jewels, you put the gold, you put the silver, you bring it all into the city, blah, 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 safe. We'll be about to pick it up, in 2 weeks or whatever. That is why many feel like that's why he had so much money. Of course, then again, he was a thief. He was slick and sly. He was probably skimming off the top too from the palace itself. I mean, so he was it's kind of like a politician today. We know he makes a lot of money, but we don't know really how much how much they've accumulated, or how many bribes they've gotten. Who knows?
If he wasn't that way before he went in, he was.
He definitely was that when he came out. And I'm sure there was that aspects in the kingdoms where foreign nations would try to get to the king. There were assassination plots all the time, and they could have been bribing, for information. They could, there's a host of things there that could happen. Yes, ma'am.
Well, he could have made friends with other bigwigs
Mm-hmm.
in the palace.
Yeah.
And kind of wiggle his way in that way.
Yeah. There's no telling. He definitely was a manipulator, so he definitely had gotten his spot.
One of the commentaries I read said that the king, as we know, was definitely a party animal.
Right.
He took off his ring, gave it to Haman, and said, do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
He really wasn't concerned with what Haman was going to do, just whatever.
Sure.
Don't bother me with it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it said he sort of gave him a free.
Because once he had that ring, he was able to stamp anything he wanted to. It's his seal of approval. Exactly right. Yep. All right, well, good stuff. All right, so we move then to, if you're taking notes on chapter number 5, number 1, Esther's approach. All right, we're talking about Esther's approach here. So now if you remember, we just talked about it, you just don't show up, you just don't talk to the king, even if you're his wife, right? So you had to be summoned, and he had to make that gesture. So Esther has to do this very wisely. All right, she's got to go before the king. She can't just barge in there and be this little whiny, fingernails on a chalkboard kind of a woman, nagging woman, and the king's going to say, whatever, get out of here, it's fine. She knows that's not the approach, all right? So she says, well, look at verse 1. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther, this is after the fast, right, and the prayer, that Esther, she cleaned herself up, got rid of all that, she put on her royal apparel, and she stood in the inner court of the king's house. Just happened to be over against the king's house. And you see that there, over against the king's house. And also the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. So get the picture. She doesn't go to the palace seeking an appointment. All right? Now, movies portray it all different ways. It doesn't look like she's running over there again trying to see the king. She goes close to where she knows he'll be. She may know his modi operandi, right? Her mode of operation. She may know what he's doing on certain days and where he'll be. And so she puts herself in a position where at some point she will be in his vision. She'll be in his line of sight. I do that when I walk through the school over there, walking down the hallways, you know, people are teaching, I stand back away from the door, I'm looking through the window, you know, and I'm making faces at them, and they're laughing, trying to look at the teacher and all this kind of stuff. I'm in their line of sight, but the teacher can't see me, but the kids can, right? And I think that's kind of what she's doing right there. And you understand, she's not an ugly person. Am I right? She just won Miss Persia, all right? And so that's how she's the queen right there. And so she's very, very pretty. And it almost appears as if she's using that beauty, using her beauty to get an audience with the king. Look at verse 2. And so it was when the king saw Esther the queen. So she grabbed his attention. He's like, doggone it. That's that girl I married. I hadn't seen her. What in the world? Anyway, he sees her standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. Once again, he was smitten with her beauty. And he's like, oh, okay. Can't believe I hadn't talked to her in 30 days, right? And the king, 33 days now. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. I mean, he just, hey. So the Bible says that Esther drew near. She touched the top of the scepter. So it appears her plan worked. All right? If I could just get in his line of sight, we might have a little something going on. So she gets close enough to him, and indeed he held out a scepter, and she approached him. And he's like, hey, baby, what's going on? What you need? Right? That's what he said. Look at verse 3. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? What do you need, babe? And what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to half of the kingdom. He's in a very generous mood. All right? He is like, whatever you want. Whatever it is. Half the kingdom? I mean, come on, that is pretty significant. But she's smooth. I mean, Esther is smooth. She doesn't go straight to the point and say, oh, honey, you're not going to believe what they're going to do. They're going to kill our people. No. She kind of gives them the little, oh, hey. Oh, you look nice today. Good to see you. How have you been? So she's not striking while the iron's hot, so to speak, right? Here's what she says. She asks for some more time with him. Come on, she's good. She's good. And then she does what every good woman knows to do or ought to know to do. You get to the heart of your man through his stomach, right? So that's what happens. Besides that, she knows full well that her king, her husband, he's always up for a party, right? And so look what she does, verse 4. So Esther answered after he said, what do you want? Half the kingdom, right? She says, if it seem good unto thee, king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. So she doesn't ask him for anything. Just, can I spend some more time with you? We haven't seen each other in a while, and I've got a really nice spread. I'd love for you to come by. Bring Haman. I'd love to do that. And so he takes the bait, right? Hook, line, sinker. He's like, he's sucked in. Tonight? You having a party tonight? Done. Be there. What's the attire? Are we going business casual? I mean, what are we doing tonight? Hey, Leaf, go tell Haman we're going to a party tonight. Tell him don't be late. Hurry it up. That's what he says, right? The king says, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman, they come to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So it works. All right? Esther now has the king in her presence. She has the king on her turf. Not at his palace, not at his place. And notice, y'all, this is one day. Notice how quickly this has turned. She has gone from not sure if the king will even see her and acknowledge her to now he's literally eating out of her hand. Right? What an amazing thing. And of course, we know God orchestrated all this. This was only something that God could have done. Verse 6, and so the king said to Esther, at the banquet of wine. You know she's going to have wine there, right? By the way, Esther, the book of Esther is not a picture of morality concerning even Esther and Mordecai. I mean, Esther, she has married a non-Jew. So we can never look at Mordecai and Esther as being the perfect saint, because they weren't. I mean, they lived in a very immoral society. They were engaged in a lot of things that were forbidden by the Jews, right? She shouldn't have had a wine tasting. She shouldn't have had this banquet right here in this day as a Jew. So they were commanded not to do that, right? So when we study the book of Esther, I just wanted to kind of sideline that and just let you know we can't elevate her to the point of she's like the perfect Christian little girl, because she's kind of far from it. I mean, there is some conniving going on. Right? That's not to say that God still doesn't use us, even though we're not everything that we think we are or that people think we are. Does that make sense? Okay.
Not everything that we should be.
Yeah, exactly. Even though we're not everything we should be, God still uses. God still gets His will done. So you're absolutely right. So, she said. So Esther said to the king, said to Esther at the banquet of wine, "What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed." So the king is once again, just like he did earlier that day, is willing to give her the moon. All she has to do is ask for it. But once again, this young lady is smart. She's not so easily, moved right here. She knows how to work him. Look at verse 7. By the way, did they teach you ladies how to do this in school or something? I mean, is this like a class how to manipulate a man? We don't know. They don't. It's instinct.
It just comes naturally.
Well, it's working right here, because then answered Esther when he asked the second time. Well, what I really would like, my petition, my request. Look at it, verse number 7. If I found favor in thy sight of the king, if you love me, and if it please the king to grant my petition, I mean, I'll tell you what you want, and to perform my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. I like to get together. I like to spend just a little more time. This is nice, isn't it? Isn't it a nice night? I've enjoyed being with you, sweetheart. I'd love to do it again. Can we do it again tomorrow night? Let's just not talk about. Let's just look at each other in the eyes. Let's just love on each other and I a little bit. Tomorrow we can talk about some things. I got another banquet. I'd love for you and Haman to come back to that. And the king's like, okay. And, would you do that for me, sweetie? And he's like, yeah, not a problem. So we move along, and Haman, he begins to think he's the stuff. I mean, he already has a very high position, but now, oh my word, he has been elevated. Notice, number 2, that the enemy's arrogance. I already talked about Esther's approach. Now we see the enemy's arrogance. Nothing is going to stop him now. Right? You've heard that phrase, you can't tell him nothing now. It's kind of like that little kid who doesn't usually get on base, but he smacks a home run, and all of a sudden, you can't tell him nothing the rest of the night. You can't tell him how to play ball. He's figured it out, right? Haman is there. He's being recognized in enormous ways. Not only does he have the king's approval, now the queen is requesting his presence at her royal shindigs. And so he is like, yeah. Right? And he's got to get home. He's got to go tell his wife. He's got to go tell his friends. He's got to go brag about all these things. And he's in a great mood, to say the least. Right? So he's leaving the party, right? And he's fine until he leaves the palace. Look at verse 9. Then went Haman forth that day, joyful, and with a glad heart. Well, who wouldn't be? You just left the king and the queen. I mean, you spent time with him. But when Haman saw Mordecai, and by the way, when I was studying this, I had a guy, he pronounces it Mordecai, and I don't know what the proper term is, but either way, Mordecai in the king's gate. When Haman sees him there, that he stood not up, that Mordecai didn't stand up, nor move for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. He is like, I mean, he just goes off the edge. And Haman's reminded of the conversation that he had already had concerning, his buddies and how Mordecai had a lack of respect for him. And so he wants to do, right then he wants to slap him. He wants to do something. But he doesn't have time. He's got to get home, right? He's got to get back to his family, his friends, and relay his recent promotion. Verse 10. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, And when he came home, he sent and he called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. He's like, hey, y'all, the king has hooked me up. That's what he's telling them right there. Life is good. Even had a little get together with the queen tonight, you know. And to be honest with you, it's just me, the king, and just me and the big guy, and Mrs. Queen. And stop it off. We're headed back over there tomorrow. I don't know what's going to go on. I don't know what's. It's good. Life is good. This is big. I'm serious. This is good. Verse 12. Haman said, moreover, yea, as for the queen, did let no man come in with the queen unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow I'm invited unto her also with the king. It's going to happen again. So yes, life is good. Then he says, but there is something that's kind of bothering me. And it was a great day till I came home, right before I got here. Not everybody's honoring me like they should. In particular, that detestable Jew, Mordecai's his name. He taunts me. He mocks me. He doesn't recognize who I am. Doesn't give me reverence that he's supposed to do. And I'm sick and tired of it. Verse 13. He said, all these things, this is good, yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. He says, all this stuff is fine, but if Mordecai doesn't reverence me like he should, what point is it? Now, I think he's being a little bit, dramatic here. He's exaggerating it quite a bit. So, but Mrs. Haman, Zeresh being her name, along with his friends, like, dude, you're Haman. No one should treat you like that, especially not now. Do something about it. Take care of it. And so listen to their plan. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends with him, well, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high. And tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. You mean get rid of the dude. Then, after you do that, go in thou merrily with the king into the banquet and have a party. I mean, celebrate. Knock it out in the morning, go celebrate that night. And the Bible says the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. So he was a man of authority, man of power, man of means. He's like, yeah, go construct it, 50 cubits high. Get me a gallows. So the plan is in action. Make some gallows, talk to the king about taking care of that Jew, then go to the queen's party, and so he enacts it, all right? But we see once again the Lord working in the situation, all right? Number 3, we read about the expedient award. This moves us to chapter number 6 now, all right? Chapter 6. So, the plan is the next day for Haman to go and talk to the king, hang him on the gallows that's already been built. They had to work overnight to do it. Got it done. And then they're going to have a party that night with the queen. All right, so all this is right back to back. But that night, everybody goes to bed, and we see how the Lord makes it where the king can't sleep. It's a restless night for him. He just I don't know if he's had a great time, with his wife. He's thinking about the next day. Who knows? But I believe it was God orchestrated. He just couldn't sleep. He couldn't get any rest. So he orders somebody to bring him a record of things that have transpired in his kingdom. It's basically turned on the news. All right? That's what he did. Turn on the news, and that'll put you to sleep, right? That's what he's thinking right there. Hey, go read me what's going on. Catch me up on some stuff. Verse 1, on that night could not the king sleep. And he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they read before the king. And so he's like, so they bring him, the Chronicles was the chronicling of what has transpired, right? So you remember now when Mordecai got wind of the plot to assassinate the king, right? I remember Bigtan and Teresh, the thugs, and Mordecai got wind of that. He overheard it. Somebody else told Mordecai about it. But remember, he went and told Esther, there's a plot, there's a coup about to kill the king. You need to let him know. And so she went, told the king, and the plot was foiled. All right, y'all remember that, right? I told you, now we're going through that. I said, nothing was ever done there, but it was recorded, it was written down. Well, now they're reading back some of the minutes, some of the happenings of the most recent few days, and here it is. Mordecai, saves the king, I don't know what the headline on the newspaper was, but, Mordecai's the man, right? I don't know, saves king's life. Who knows what it is? But he's never recognized for his deeds right there. And so the king is about to remember that, though, as he reads about that account. Verse 2, and it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. So it comes back to him, and he's like, what did we ever do for Mordecai for saving my life? And they were like, nothing really, king. I mean, it was nothing. I mean, really. He's like, you serious? Man, saved my life? And we didn't do anything wrong. Who's coming in today? Who's on shift? Who's on call today? That's what he's asking right there. And the king said, well, what honor and dignity hath been done to him for this? Then the king's servants that ministered to him said, well, there is nothing done for him. And so he's like, really? And the king answered, well, who's in the court? Who's on today? Who's on ship? Now Haman just so happened, right, to come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king at that very moment to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So it just so happens that Haman's coming in to speak to the king at that very moment about getting permission to go ahead and hang Mordecai, to kill Mordecai. The gallows were already prepared. By the way, a little side note right here. I have always, well not always, just several years ago now I was really studying this out. Always look, we talk about someone being hung, you always think of a rope, right, being hung around their neck or whatever. And most every historian that I read about, a commentator, did you notice this right here? It's what?
Impaled.
Yeah, it's not a hangman's noose of sorts. It's in reference to a large stick that's pointed, so to speak, and they are impaled. They're hung up there, which we get the hung part, like hanging a picture on a nail, right? Or a cross, so to speak. But they're impaled and hung for all to see. And so that's what it appears these gallows are. Whether or not they brought them up there, held them over it, dropped them and let it go through them and pierce them, or if they pierced them and then stuck it up, whatever the case was, it wasn't necessarily the way that we would think of in the old Wild West. Stop horses hiding and take off and they're hanging there, right? But, I mean, it could have been. I mean, we don't know. No one was there. But it does get the indication that it was more of an impaling that was going on right here about these guys, right? Anyway, that's just kind of a sad note there, and a side note, and a sad note, I guess, for his family. But anyway, so nothing was done. And so the gallows were prepared. And so the king's servant said unto him, verse 5, behold, because the king said, who's in the court? Who's here today? And they said, behold, Haman standeth in the court. Haman's here. I mean, and the king said, let him come in. Yeah, I need to talk to him. But before Haman even can have the conversation talking about Mordecai, the king starts talking, right? And this is so funny, so ironic, I think. Listen to this conversation. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, Haman, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? If I really wanted to honor somebody, what do you think should be done? Give me some ideas right here. Now, Haman thought in his heart, who else would the king want to honor but me? That's what he said. To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? So you get this, right? The king wants to honor Mordecai to the nth degree in a very special way. But he doesn't reveal who he's talking about when he asks Mordecai. He doesn't say, by the way, Haman, Mordecai, the dude that saved my life, I want to do something for him. What do you think we should do? He just kind of says, well, I want to honor somebody. What do you think I should do? And so Haman, he's on cloud 9 right now, right? I mean, come on, y'all. He is heading to the queen's house again tonight. He just was there the night before. And so he thinks, obviously, that the king is referring to honoring him. And so in his mind, he's about to tell the king exactly what he wants done to himself. He literally thinks he's writing his own script here. He's writing his own ticket. He's writing his own resume. I mean, he doesn't hold back. Listen to what he says. So Haman answered the king and said, I think he's playing a little dumb on it, right? Going, wow, king, that's a great honor. Man, what a lucky man. I tell you what I would do for the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Let the royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and maybe the crown royal, the crown which is set upon his head. And maybe, king, you could let this apparel and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princesses. I mean, get one of your higher ups, and they may array the man, put all these clothes on him, and with all whom the king delighteth to honor, and have that guy, that noble prince, bring him on horseback through the street of the city. And have that guy proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And so he pours it on thick. I mean, he suggests that this king pulls out all the stops. King, you let this guy wear your clothes. Let him wear your robe. I mean, that would be awesome. Nobody does that. And then, if you really, really want to do this upright, king, let him wear your crown. Now, you asked me. I'm just telling you, king. Let him wear your crown. Tell me that wouldn't get some honor to a man. And then let him ride your horse. That stud, let him ride that. And then have one of your most noble men lead him about the city. And just shout and say, this is the man whom the king wants to honor. And if the king really wants to honor somebody, this is what it would look like. Hail the man on the horse. I mean, it's a good plan. It's pretty stinking high end right there. Right? And look, the king loves it. He's like, boom, yeah! Here for a reason. Awesome idea. Now here's what I need you to do. The king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse as thou hast said. And so Haman, he is told to do all he suggested. The king said, okay, yeah, I'm good with that. And then the king's like, hurry up and do this now. And Haman, he's salivating over the idea, right? He's like, oh, yes. And then all of a sudden the wind is just poof, knocked out of his sails. Make haste, take the apparel and the horse as thou said, yes. And do so even to Mordecai the Jew. Do what, king?
Who?
The guy that sits at the king's gate, Mordecai the Jew. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken of. Everything you just told me, I want you to do for the king. Is this not hilarious? I mean, it's great. I mean, what a movie, what a script, right? This is amazing. All the things that Haman wanted is now being done by the man he detests and was planning on killing. And here's the deal. Haman is the one who gets to lead him around. That's the noble prince. Genius. So it says, verse 12, then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and he arrayed Mordecai, brought him on horseback through the street of the city. I don't know, it doesn't say he loudly proclaimed him. But it says, proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man of the king who lieth in the honor. This is rich. This is so good. And it just shows you that the proud shall fall, right? And so next week we'll pick it back up, all right? We can't keep going. We're already beyond our time. It gets gooder, okay? It's amazing. So we'll finish up there. Let me make my note here so I won't forget. Any comments, any thoughts here about this? Anything that you've had questions about or wonder about?
I don't have any thoughts or comments, but there is a movie
Mm-hmm.
that's about this. It's called One Night with the King.
One Night with the King. Yeah, I think several have seen that. We've talked about that. I don't remember all the details of it. I don't remember how close to Scripture it falls. Sure.
But there are big stories
Yeah.
in that part in the movie. I just love
Okay, yeah, I need to go look that up and take a look at that. I don't know if I've actually seen the movie. I know what you're talking about. I think my wife's probably seen it. I don't know if I've ever seen it, but I just have this image in my head, you know, of how this is going to go down right here. It's just great. It's just great. So I mean, I could write I could make a movie out of this right here easy myself. Yes, sir.
You wondered about how women learn all these things.
Mm-hmm. We can turn this off. Hey, thank y'all for tuning in today. We'll see y'all next time. Pick us up again. Yes, sir. We hope that was an encouragement to you tonight. You may want to know more information. Maybe you have some questions. Maybe you'd like to pray with somebody and talk to somebody about some spiritual matters in your life. We have a pastoral care line, and we would love for you to be able to call. We have pastors standing by right now to be able to take those calls and assist you. We also have Wednesday night program for our teens as well as our young people. We have an Awana program here, and perhaps you or someone you know might like to be a part of that. You can find this and a whole lot more information on our website, VictoryBaptist.Church. God bless you and have a great evening.